React has gotten some major updates recently, and before you get overwhelmed thinking you need to relearn everything from scratch, I want to give you some good news. Most of these concepts build on what you already know, and they're designed to make your development experience much smoother. Today we're going to walk through every essential React concept you need to master, from the fundamentals to the advanced patterns. Plus, I'll show you exactly how they work together in real applications. Let's start with the foundation. Components. So what exactly is a component? Well, think of it like a JavaScript function that returns some HTML, but with superpowers. Here's the simplest possible React component. What this is doing is creating a reusable piece of UI that we can use anywhere in our application. Notice how we're using JSX or JavaScript XML syntax here. That's the HTML-like code inside our JavaScript function. The reason we use this approach is because it lets us write our UI logic and presentation code in the same place, which makes components much easier to understand and maintain. But components become really powerful when we add props. Props are like arguments to a function. They let us customize our components. Take a look at this enhanced version. Here's what's happening in this example. On line 1, we're destructuring the props object to pull out name and age. Then on lines 3 and 4, we're using JavaScript expressions inside curly braces to display those values. This is a game changer because now we can reuse this component with different data throughout our application. Now let's dive into state. This is where React really starts to shine. State is data that can change over time, and when it changes, React automatically re-renders our component with the new data. Here's how it works with the useState hook. Let me walk you through this code step by step. On line 4, we're calling useState with an initial value of 0. This returns an array with two elements, the current state value and a function to update it. We're using array destructuring to assign these to count and setCount. The magic happens on line 9. When someone clicks the button, we call setCount with a new value, and React automatically re-renders the component with the updated count. But what if you want to customize this further? Let's look at a more advanced example that shows how state and props work together. This might look complex, but here's what's actually happening under the hood. We're managing two pieces of state, the todos array and the input field value. On line 7, notice how we're using the spread operator to create a new array instead of mutating the existing one. This is crucial for React's rendering optimization. The key thing to understand here is that React compares the previous state with the new state and only re-renders when it detects changes, and it gets even better with hooks. The useEffect hook lets us perform side effects, things like API calls, subscriptions, or manual DOM changes. Here's how it works. Breaking this down line by line, we start with two pieces of state for the user data and loading status. The useEffect hook runs after the component mounts, and whenever the useRed prop changes, that's what the dependency array on line 20 controls. This approach is faster because React can optimize when to run effects based on what actually changed. But there's even more to React's power. Component composition and lifting state up. When you have multiple components that need to share state, you move that state to their common parent. Here's a practical example. See how this eliminates the problem of having duplicate state in multiple components? The parent component owns the state, and child components receive it through props and communicate changes back through callback functions. Now here's where things get tricky. And this is a problem every React developer runs into eventually. What happens when you need to share data between components that are deeply nested or far apart in your component tree? This brings us to something called prop drilling. Prop drilling occurs when you need to pass data through multiple layers of components, even when some of those intermediate components don't actually use that data. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Notice the problem here. The header and navigation components don't actually use the user data. They're just passing it down to reach the user menu component that actually needs it. This is prop drilling in action, and it creates several issues. First, it makes your code unnecessarily complex. Every time you add or remove a prop, you have to update multiple components that don't even use that data. Second, it tightly couples your components together. You can't easily move user menu to a different part of your app without bringing all those intermediate components with it. This is exactly the problem that React's Context API was designed to solve. Context lets you create global channels for data that any component can tap into directly without having to pass props through every level of the component tree. Now let's see this in action with a more elegant solution. We create a context, wrap our app in a provider, and any component can access the theme state using our custom hook. This pattern helps because it eliminates prop drilling while keeping the state management logic centralized and reusable. A more advanced use case would be handling complex state logic with useReducer. When useState becomes unwieldy with complex state updates, useReducer provides a more predictable pattern. Notice the issues this solves. Instead of multiple useState calls and complex state update logic scattered throughout your component, everything is centralized in the reducer function. You might be wondering why we use this approach, and here's the answer. It makes state updates more predictable and easier to test. In a real application, you typically combine these patterns. For example, you might use context for global state like user authentication, useState for local component state like form inputs, and useReducer for complex state logic like shopping carts or data tables. I hope this comprehensive walkthrough was helpful for understanding how all these React concepts connect together. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week.